What's up, y'all? This is Zach with Living Corporate, and look, I ain't even gonna hold y'all. Very excited about today's guest. I'm excited about today's episode. I'm just excited about today. I'm thankful that we have new leadership in the White House, though I am under no illusion that the realities of white supremacy continue to be a blight on all things equity and inclusion. And I also realize that for us to continue to create a more equitable and just world, we're going to need to continue to agitate systems and hold leaders accountable. And again, I'm excited because the person who I spoke to today spoke into me about that. Antoine Andrews, who is the first Chief Diversity and Social Impact Officer at SurveyMonkey, came on the show. We talked about the fact that he's taken on this new role, what it means to him, what it means for him, and why he's excited about SurveyMonkey. So I want to shout him out, thank him in advance. And then I also want to thank Emery, my little baby girl. She's almost 10 months old, y'all. And she was a guest on the show as well. You'll hear some of her contributions. But look, before we get into the conversation I had with Antoine, let's tap in with Tristan.
What's going on, Living Corporate? It's Tristan, and I want to thank you for tapping back in with me as I provide some tips and advice for professionals. This week, I want to discuss how to set yourself up for a raise or promotion so you can be where the money resides, where the money resides, where the money resides, where the money resides, okay? Many of us arrive at our end of the year reviews with our fingers crossed, hoping that we receive that raise or promotion. The majority of us end up disappointed, either because we got that standard industry 2% raise, or worse, none at all. That's never a fun space to be in, but there are a few steps you can take to increase your chances of landing a higher raise or that promotion you were seeking. Many of the things we are going to discuss were inspired by a thread I found on Twitter by Simone B, at Simone MBANNA. So let's dive into them. It starts at the beginning of the year when you're setting your goals with your boss. Take some time to identify the intersection of what the company wants and what you provide. Where those two things overlap is what you can do for the company, your unique value proposition, if you will. All of your goals should be derived from this area, as they will serve the dual purpose of meeting the company's goals and meeting some of your own professional goals. When setting these goals, you want to focus on things that are relevant to your personal and professional goals, things that are impactful to the company, and finally, things that can be measured or quantified. Use the acronym RIM, R-I-M, to remember where you should be focusing: relevant, impactful, and measurable. Many professionals make the mistake of waiting until a performance review to discuss a raise or promotion. These are conversations that should be happening all year round during your one-on-ones with your boss. Take the time to ask them, am I on track to receive a raise? Or am I on track to receive a promotion? And if not, what do I need to change? Lastly, you want to make sure you gather receipts. Keep emails from internal and external stakeholders who are singing your praises for the work you've done. Simone mentioned even creating a survey to send out to people you've worked with to measure your performance against company goals and promotional criteria. This is actually a tactic I've successfully used in several jobs. Ensure that you share this information with your boss, both in your one-on-ones and during your performance review. If you follow these tips, you will set yourself on the right track to get where the money resides, whether that's a raise or a promotion. Make sure to follow Simone at Simone M. Banna, which is SIMONE-MBANNA on Twitter, because she is continually dropping gems. Thanks for tapping in with me today. Don't forget, I'm now taking submissions from you all on career questions, issues, concerns, or advice you think may help others. So make sure to submit yours at bit.ly/tapintristan. That's bit.ly/TAPINTRISTAN. This tip was brought to you by Tristan of Layfield Resume Consulting. Check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Layfield Resume, or connect with me, Tristan Layfield, on LinkedIn.
Antoine, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you, man.
Hey, now look, I know it's a loaded question. How are you feeling?
Zach, I'm doing okay. And I think that's a balance for me. of, everything that's going on. If I look at the full spectrum of life, from work, politics, race, my family, myself, I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay.
Well, I mean, I feel like as Black people, we have to celebrate because racism is over again. You know what I'm saying? Racism is over again. We got we got the instigator of all things white supremacy out the office.
Mhm.
We got a really nice white guy back in the office with a Black and brown woman this time as vice president. So I just feel like that ceiling that was there 4 years ago and that was broken and it came back is gone again. So I feel great.
Yeah, well, Netflix will not be calling you to do a stand-up show. So, but I'm glad you're feeling good. I'm so glad you're feeling good. And I'm disappointed you won't get your Netflix special.
Now look, we're in January and it's a new year. You talk about the totality of just like emotional spectrum, and I know that we all suffered losses of various degrees. Sadly, even many of us lost our lives, or 400,000 people, have passed away related to COVID-19. Let me ask you this: what did the tragedies of last year bring into focus for you as you prepare for this year?
Yeah, and that's that again. That's a big question, but I and for me it's a timeline of things that if I think about it. So just bear with me for a minute. If I think about all of last year, I start in January and remember when I was sitting when I heard Kobe Bryant had passed. I remember that January day, my son had sent me a text that, hey, Kobe died, and we know a young man named Kobe. And I was like, what Kobe? He's like, Bryant. And I remember how hard that hit me. I had people reaching out to me, and I wasn't a huge Kobe fan. That was the start of the year. That was the start of the year for me. And then we moved to the pandemic, and I was in New York, had a chance to spend time my birthday in March with my parents, and ended up staying 2 months in New Jersey during the pandemic with my parents. It was the first time in my adult life that I had spent extended time living with my parents, which was a new thing for me. And then, work and all of George Floyd and all of that. So if I think about 21, what it prepared me for was understanding and embracing what's important to me, my family, understanding the three identities that of my adult life that I held close to me, being a Black man, being a Black executive, and being a diversity professional. And 2020 was the first time in my career that I was unable, Zach, really to reconcile all three of those because the George Floyd murder, it rocked me to my core. Until this day, I have not watched the 846 video. I have not watched all of it. And so I think it prepared me for how to be able to move through my identities, hold them core to who I am, and really, really try to make sure I balance the spectrum of my full life. And I think that's preparing me for this new role. But I think that's for me as I head into 2021 and the rest of the years ahead. Those are the things that I'm holding close to me, and that's what 2020 did for me.
You know what? So much of what you said resonates with me, right? So I remember where I was when I heard about the Kobe Bryant news. I was actually at the baby shower for my daughter, right? So we're over here celebrating life, and here I am thinking, and to your point, I wasn't a huge Kobe Bryant fan either. I respected the legacy and the hustle and like what he taught me, honestly, from afar. And I think many Black men resonate with this. Is like Kobe wasn't afraid to fail, and that's a superpower into itself when you think about Black men and the legacy of Black Americans and Black folks across the world. So to see someone on this stage, and yes, Kobe came from privilege, and he had international background, blah blah, but still he was a Black man, and he would just be like, I'm not afraid to fail. He pump 3 times and shoot it from 40. He didn't care.
Zach, about him, he wasn't afraid to not have people. He didn't care if people liked him or not.
He didn't.
He wanted to be great, and he did not care where you were, if you were in his corner, and that fueled him. So I think you're right. It resonated with a lot of us, and I didn't know it was going to bother me as much as it did.
Yeah. And so to your point, right? It's like, and I guess because I also, and it really became just a incredibly devastating precursor for the rest of the year of like, here's this figure. There's certain people you just don't think gonna die, you know? Frankly, a couple years ago, I felt similarly about Prince. I was like, yeah, Prince gonna just live forever. He looks great. Like he just gonna sit in his palace and he's gonna, do what he does. He'll show up to tributes and he just gonna be 150 years old. I just, and so there's those types of individuals who you just think are always gonna be here, and then suddenly they're just gone. And so it was interesting that the dichotomy of being in a place celebrating the prospect of new life and then being hit with that news in the middle of me opening up these baby gifts, right? And then to your point, right, like continuing forward, my daughter was born.
Emory
was born, and we're in the middle of a pandemic. And then, George Floyd is murdered. Now, Antoine, you may not know this. My dad and my family, I have 4 brothers and sisters who live in Minnesota. My dad lived 20 minutes away from the man who murdered George Floyd.
Really?
Yeah. So all these people, it was tons of folks just protesting in that area. Different type of protest, right? Because it's Minnesota, right? White suburbia. So the vibe and the methodologies are a little different, but still, like, we talked about just how close it was to home. And then crazier than that, Antoine, I was only 1 degree separated from George Floyd because he and I were in the same ministries together when he lived in Houston. So it rocked me to my core too. And I've yet to watch that video as well. I just can't. I can't watch it. But it's, I think between, Kobe and George Floyd, not to mention the countless other Black and brown folks who were murdered by police, including several Black trans women who were murdered by police. And then COVID-19, it's like, for me, what I took away was just like the fragility of life, right? And like how, there's no day promised. And there's a terrifying reality to that. But I'm excited about what it did for me. What it fueled for me is when I think about 2021, like I'm excited about like moving forward more courageously because, we have no guarantees in this life. So, I believe we should live as intentionally, as courageously as possible. And I think if 2020 didn't wake that up for you, I don't know what a stronger wake up call could be,
Yeah, I hear you. I think, and it's interesting to hear your 6 degrees, your separation, because I think we all have those moments. And that's, for me, I think about the South Carolina Mother Emanuel AME church shooting. I went to high school with one of the women that passed away. Really good friends.
Oh my.
Yeah. Never forget when, everyone came back. It was interesting of how we're connected in so many different ways, but we have those moments and it makes you think and really have those deep thoughts around there. So I get that. And that's, how was your dad doing during all of that?
So, I get a lot of things from my dad, but I did not get, he's unflappable in certain ways.
Okay.
He's so hyper focused on his family and his kids. He was more so concerned about making sure that my siblings didn't try to go out there and protest and get themselves hurt, because he already had kind of peeped game about people infiltrating the protests and other things going on to undermine the initiative of the authentic protesters. And so he was just focused on talking to them, keeping them safe. The reality is that both my father and I have had our own experiences with police brutality. Several years ago, we had guns pulled to our heads in Minnesota. So that shook him back then. But I think because that shook him so much, I think that's I don't want to say strengthen is a complicated word, but I'll say that it's given him a certain level of armor that he's mentally now prepared for things around him because he experienced violence so intimately,
Isn't that something what we got to be prepared for? So that's an interesting thing, right? It's unflappable. The harshness of racism has made him the stronger man. And I, I'm not saying that he wouldn't have been anyway, but the things that we leverage as Black men to be stronger is interesting if you break it down.
You're not wrong. And actually, that actually leads me into this next question. We connected offline, right? You and I already connected.
Mm-hmm.
And I shared with you how rare it is for me to have Black men, especially Black DEI type leaders. I can actually name my look because I said it and I was like, you know what? Let me just make sure, whatever. So let me just check let's check like the record of guests. So, we have a leader from Zillow, We have Chris Moreland, formerly of Vizient. And then we have Michael C. Bush, A Great Place to Work.
Right.
And we have Chris Michelle from
Mm-hmm.
Bloomberg. But again, I'm naming 4 people. We got like 350 podcast episodes. So, and like, there's some entrepreneurs sprinkled in there too. But when I think about and I say this not to like throw shade on entrepreneurs, what I mean is like, when I think about people who've gone up like, or navigated either straight vertically or positive with like zigzag corporate guys, it's rare for me to get those folks on this platform, especially if they're in the DEI in the space. We talked a little bit about how these spaces can kind of wear you down over time or compromise you if you let it. I'm curious how you've been able to maintain authenticity, or maybe a better way to say it is to make sure that you return back to yourself consistently in your career.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things, Zach, has been my authenticity, meaning who I am as a person, as a leader, has been a core component of just how I show up. But I will say over the past 5 to 7 years, I've leaned more into, my background, my experiences as a Black man, growing up in a city, growing up in a housing project, all of those things, and sharing that more, which I think has freed me up to be able to continue to lean into what I listen to, how I show up, what I wear. I'm a huge sneakerhead, all of those things. But I will say my current job, working at ERA and working with young adults who are 18 to 25 has really helped me sharpen that, because as you know, one thing I know about working with young people is that they smell a fraud right away.
Quick.
Really quick. And for me, I needed to make sure that one is I was just, making sure I showed up as myself. And two, I wasn't trying to elevate or show up in a way that, look what I've done. And that's helped me. It's helped me with my voice. It's helped me really show up in a way to lead, folks that look like me, folks that don't, in all of the communities and all of the leaders I engage with. And I think people appreciate that. And so for me, I think over time, I've been able to hold on to that, because that's what I live when I'm not working. And the dual consciousness, the double life, all of those things, it starts to wear on you over time. Now, I will say, I don't tell everybody my entire thing. One of the things I talk about is an authenticity ratio. And for me, I'm closer to, 70, 80% of the full person I am at work than I've ever been. So I think for me, it helps me, frees me up to think about more of how to be successful in my job, how to push leaders. But I think over the past 5 to 7 years, that's what, just being able to kind of know, like, this is who I am. Let's not worry about that. And let's just show up in a way that it's easy for us.
There's so much that you said there. One thing that stuck out to me is about sniffing out fraudulent behavior or fraudulent vibes or stezos, depending on your vernacular. I can tell you there's nothing more like a turnoff in this space is like, you meet a lot of, for what I've learned from my own generational cohort and certainly Gen Z is, this whole idea of like, hey, I worked at Dell or I worked at Xerox, or like, name dropping brands and stuff like that. Or like, hey, I was the such and such a Starbucks. Like, people don't really care about that. Like, they really want to understand and know how much you care, and then like where your heart and your values are, right? Like, I've seen more and more folks who don't have this like really pristine or like highbrow corporatized background. They may have been like a local organizer or something. And I think you see that in the political realm as well, like Cory Bush and like other people who are like, I think the overall ethos and just like the attitudes are shifting away from ties to large capitalistic systems and more, and getting back to service oriented values and like brands, right? So it's like, that's what we really want to see. To that end, I really want to, we try to keep it 100, don't live in corporate. I'm gonna be honest with you, like we haven't really had to like hold back, and I'm really proud about that, to be honest with you, Antoine. Like, I'm thankful, like, and not that we be just going crazy, but there's certain things, language that we use that I just don't think folks really be using in other spaces. So let me keep it 100 with you. Between ongoing videos capturing police brutality, MAGA culture not going anywhere despite racism going away, like I said earlier, the attempted insurrection, and raising political tensions with an entirely Democratic government, I don't know if corporate America is responding to this moment with the gravitas it deserves. Like, I'm not sure. We'll talk about SurveyMonkey in a minute because that's a bit of an exception.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not sure if like the DEI space, if executive leaders, I don't know if we're ready for this, if we really appreciate what's happening right now. Do you think I'm tripping?
I don't think you're tripping. I want to go back to something you said a little earlier about community, corporate. There's a saying that I picked up, and we say it at Year Up, and I'm going to use it overall, but it's one of the things: we don't care how much you know until we know how much you care. And I think that's a great point about this work as well. You know, we're in historic times, and people say that, and I don't say that lightly. And I'm not sure if everyone knows how much and what level to match the time that we're in. And so I think everyone is trying to figure it out. I think we'll watch, President Biden and Madam Vice President Kamala Harris to see if they're ready for it all, because everyone's expecting, and this is where I think we all fall off. We're expecting, to your point earlier, to go from 0 to 100 in maybe 100 days. Like everything will be fixed in 100 days. That's going to be tough. And so I think corporate America has a voice. Corporate America has made commitments. Big companies have made commitments. But I think the rubber's going to hit the roads 3, 4, 5 years from now to see and be able to answer your question of, did we step up to the plate? Did we meet it with the gravitas that it needs? I don't know. It's hard to say right now. I do think people are trying to figure it out. But I think we're going to have to really make sure that we hold folks accountable. And I mean everybody, the folks in the White House, the Democrats, whoever. We're going to have to hold folks accountable to make sure that we are striving for the results that we all want to see. And it's not just numbers. It's those lived experiences. Like you said, the police brutality and how you're engaging. We want to see that change as well. And so you're not tripping. You're not tripping. The moment is big. The moment is big. And are we ready to thinking about Kobe Bryant, are we ready to take that shot? And we got to hit it. We got to hit the shot.
Yeah, 100%. Now look, Emery is taking a nap and we're in the living room, so I'm not going to play the sound effect live, but sound man, give me them air horns right here. Elephant in the room. Monkeys in the room. Congratulations, man, on being SurveyMonkey's first Chief Diversity and Social Impact Officer. I recognize that this is not, what they be saying. You're not new to this. You're true to this. You've been in this for a second. But I also recognize, based on just the conversation we've been having, and on and offline, is that you're always growing and you recognize shifts and how landscapes are continuing to change. I'm curious, what makes this opportunity with SurveyMonkey different for you?
Yeah, I think the combination of internal, focused on our culture, talent, and the external piece of really being able, whether it's product, helping create voice around the work, talking to folks like you is critical. I think that's the biggest piece, the big piece. The other piece is that it brings diversity, equity, and inclusion together with social impact, which is important. Being able to have that spectrum, for me, made it very appealing. And, I'm not going to lie, the reporting structure, working directly with Xander is important. But Xander is important. I had a great opportunity to spend a lot of time talking with Xander, hearing his messages. As you know, I listen to video on you, so I watch video of Xander to see how comfortable he was and what he wanted to do. That made a huge difference for me. And so the platform that SurveyMonkey's had it's in the feedback business, and so we will use the data that's out there to really be able to tell stories, amplify voices, individual voices. And the funniest thing is, I always said, like, I'm a curious person, borderline nosy. And so to power the curious just aligns with me. Just aligns. My mom says I'm nosy. Because, she always says the first thing you ask when you get on the phone with me is not how you doing. It's like, what you doing? And so I think that for me, the power of the curious is really a huge component. It's a part of who I am as a person. So inquiry is how I lead, and so SurveyMonkey is a inquiry type organization.
To your point around Xander, when we had him on Living Corporate, because we got to like that out. We talked about I asked him, I said, hey, talk to me about how do we know this isn't just like the flavor of the month, something fleeting, like, this is pressing right now because of George Floyd and Trump being in office, but talk to me about what this looks like, in the future. And he said, well, look, I mean, I'll never get how I'm not going to repeat it verbatim, but all our content is transcribed. So, you can search yourself. But, Xander said something along the lines of, look, I'm the CEO. As long as I'm here, this is going to be important. And if you're not prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion, you're not going to be here. And it was this very matter of fact way that he said it that stuck with me. And I said, well, damn, okay, that's different. I was kind of expecting like this,
I know.
That
and
like
written response that
yeah,
felt like rehearsed.
Yeah, we value diversity of thought and blah 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 blah. He ain't say none of that. And so to that end, the other thing that what you just said about the power of the curious, and then also just the culture of SurveyMonkey being focused on feedback. Because remember, the other thing I asked is like, how do you manage and deal with fragility, and like how do you wrestle with your own fragility and like getting tough feedback? And he said, well, we're a feedback organization, right? So like this idea of like, if you can't handle someone giving you tough feedback, he's like, you probably shouldn't work here, right? Like you have to deal with that here if you want to do that. And I do think, when you think about organizations and like one of the biggest barriers to true equity is authentic dialogue and solutioning and giving tough feedback, because we're constantly, I mean, I really would like to get your opinion on this because we're running so well on time. Even though this was one of my questions, is how have you managed the, I'm gonna say fragility, but I also mean egos of like your white stakeholders as you do this DEI work? Like I'm curious about that.
I think I gotta look at it throughout my entire career. I think I tried to manage to them early in my career more than I should have. And what I mean by that is I think I was more concerned about how they reacted to, feedback or talking about increase in diversity early in my career. And as I started to take on more of a leadership role, I realized that was not about me. It was about them. It wasn't about the work. It was about them. And I always listen to a lot of sports radio, and one of the sportscasters always talks about a me problem or a you problem. And for me, I started to identify, well, that really sounds and feels like a you problem. So I'm not going to own your stuff.
Yeah.
And so I think right now the comfort level that people have and the discomfort level that people have around talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, race, racism, white fragility, white privilege, all of those words, it's more centered around what they need to do. And I can't help them with that. I've had a conversation with a leader, and I realized there were some things he needed to figure out. And I remember saying to him, I think you're going to need to address those things and then come back to me and we can talk. I can't help you understand why you are reacting to things that aren't really directed towards you, and you're centering yourself, centering whiteness and all of those things. So right now, I think we all have to do an internal search on where we are in this country, in this world, and in our lives around understanding the role we've played in lack of equity, racism, all of those things. And that's that internal work that everyone has to do. The book, Me and White Supremacy, I don't know if you read that, it's an amazing book, And what I love about it is that you got to spend the time. You got to take your time in those 28 days to ask yourself tough questions and really be able to process why you feel that way. And if you can't do that, we're going to have an issue when it comes time to talking about behavior, leadership style, all of those things. So for me, there's some internal work. I believe that there's a mindset shift to drive behavioral change that's important around all of this work. And people have to want to do it in order to get there. So for me, I think I've grown in my career. I think I've grown in my confidence level as a leader, but I've also learned not to pick up and hold other people's stuff.
That's such a profound answer. The top of it, where you rejected responsibility for things that you can't control. I think that there's this, I'll speak for myself. There's this tension and pressure that I've had in my career when I'm consulting and I am, I'm having conversations with leaders where when there is a response that is not that's odd to me, or that to your point, to your language, is basically them centering themselves or centering whiteness and not necessarily discussing the matter at hand, where I then respond and internalize and say, okay, well, how do I coach them and help them fix that? As opposed to calling out the reality that, hey, that's something that you need to shift and change. And so it's interesting, we talked about Biden's first 100 days. I don't want you to give any sauce away, or too much anyway. But let's talk about, your first 100 days coming brand new into SurveyMonkey. What's going to be your focus?
Yeah, I think it's 5 things, Zach, and so I'll try to I'll explain them and then try be focused on them and explain them for you at the same time. The first thing is I got to prepare myself for this role, and also we got to make sure SurveyMonkey is prepared. It's a new role for SurveyMonkey, it's a new role for me, and in that preparation, it's just sitting back. I have a week break from when I end working with Year Up to when I join SurveyMonkey, and I'm going to spend some time just rethinking and going through my career and things I thought I did well, things I could have done differently, all of my roles, and going into this role with a view on what success could look like, how I'll show up different, how I'll show up the same. And then I think the other piece is when I land in SurveyMonkey in early February, is helping the organization, the leaders, the people that I'll be working with know what this role is about and how this role will engage with the leaders and the teams overall. So that's the first one, really preparing myself in SurveyMonkey. The second one is really understanding the work that's been done before me. SurveyMonkey has done a lot of great work prior to me arriving there. So I need to understand that. But there are a lot of people that have been doing good work. So I need to understand the investments that were made from the leadership team, the current team that I'll be joining, employee resource group leaders, all of those things. So really understanding the landscape and appreciating the landscape. Third one is establishing relationships, both internally and externally. This is a part of that. Like you said, you and I connected offline, which was great. We're on this conversation today, but understanding relationships, and this is, not only leadership, not only employee resource groups. I know in organizations, there are influencers who may be at a more junior level, but they're influencers. Staff listens to them. How do I make sure I know who those folks are? So establishing key relationships. Building my team is critical. You said keeping it 100. That's going to be critical. But, I think building a new team is going to be critical for me, and making sure that we have the right skills and abilities to be able to drive for that. And you got to have quick wins. You're watching this play out right now. Everyone's talking about what President Biden has to do. The first thing they're outlining is how do you get to 100 million people vaccinated in a certain month. So looking for quick wins, but also identifying those risks that will impact the agenda going forward. So those are my 5 key components right now for me. And this is the best time to be joining an organization. Everybody's talking about their first 100 or whatever. And you get to learn a lot of what leaders are going to be thinking about and doing, and who's going to do it wrong. And so I'm excited to be doing it, but I'm also excited to watch so many important leaders talk about the first 100 days.
When we talk about, your strategy and your plan, it's interesting. You made mention of relationships. I'm curious about, when you think about the chief diversity officer role, or whatever that title is, but essentially that diversity role, what relationships do you believe typically go under indexed?
That's a great question. And maybe I'll speak from my role. I think a lot of times the product business side goes under index because teams are already moving forward. You're coming into the equation late, and being able to find a way to influence change overall. So I think that's one of them. And I do think employee resource groups are under indexed, not through the lens of, helping create inclusions. They're a talent pool. They have access to so much internally and externally.
Right.
And so how do you leverage those to be able to create pipeline, not only for the now, but for the future? So you had that right off, those are the 2 for me that I think are critical and under index for a specific reason overall.
I agree. When you think about products and you think about like, I think historically, you think about diversity and inclusion, that work, it's seen as frosting, it's seen as icing. Now,
Mm-hmm.
the reality is that despite all of the rhetoric and the increased public focus, plenty of organizations still see it as icing. And so like the question I'm always challenged and like frustrated by why that D&I office role, team, whatever, what have you, is not positioned in a way that is a revenue generator, right? That is not seen as a wholly as an expense or as a truly recognized and appreciated investment that's like really tied to real dollars, even if those dollars aren't immediate. Like I'm consistently curious about that because we see especially in tech, right? We see all these articles come out about like, AI and how it, we found out that these autonomous cars can't see black folks. We found we found out be like crazy stuff that they find out that they quote unquote discover, years or several quarters after the fact. After they got a couple dead bodies, it's like, oh my gosh, like what. And so the question I have there is like, man, why are y'all not figuring out? I mean, y'all a bunch of smart folks up there. Why aren't y'all figuring out ways to integrate your D&I folks into the products research team or the development team or the like the review, like something? Y'all got to integrate them somehow.
Yeah.
And then to your second point around employee resource groups, man, I continue to say, the same, that like those groups are pools of talent, right? You think about like, first of all, again, we live in a capitalist society. The goal is always to get the most labor for the least amount of cost. And you have these folks, now I'm speaking very pessimistically, but you have these folks who out of the passion of their hearts are engaged in these spaces. A couple of organizations will pay a little something, a little stipend for people who participate, but largely it's volunteer who are really willing to do whatever if they had direction and investment and sponsorship. And so even if an organization was to put a few dollars in, it's still going to be exponentially cheaper than you hiring some external place and whatever. And so I constantly question and am disappointed, frankly, by the lack of strategic integration that many employee resource groups have in terms of, okay, well, how are they integrating into your talent management strategy? How are they integrating into your products strategy and marketing plans? How they integrate? Like, there's so many different ways that you can plug those people in. And if you tie it back to like overall talent strategy, you then are creating avenues and mechanisms for retention, right? Which is a huge issue in tech, as we know. And so I agree with you. But it's interesting that despite the lack of investment that these organizations will have, if you ask executives about their diversity and inclusion, what's the first thing they bring up, Antoine?
They bring up employee resource groups.
That's the first thing they bring up. knowing they ain't put a dime in that thing.
Yeah, and it's one of the, and I think it's because we know it's how people get engaged. So if you go back to your earlier point about community engagement, the employee resource groups, those leaders are more like they're community leaders. They're community leaders. And so I think, to your point, the ability for folks to develop their skills in a place where I think it's low risk. You have the support. People are going to provide guidance for you. It's not your day job. You can hone in on opportunities overall. And I think making sure we're setting them up for success. And what I mean by that is, if we're looking to grow our talent pipeline or increase our representation, employee resource groups help with that. They shouldn't be held accountable because they're not making the decisions around that.
They ain't got the power.
Right. And so I think, but how do we use them to help us change our philosophy, get access to talent? Hey, do you know Zach Nunn? And like, yeah, we do. Can you make the connection for that kind of piece, that it expands our access? And to your point, from a consumer perspective, there are so many organizations that I've worked with that we've leveraged our employee resource groups to make sure we understand just the communities we're looking at. At Nike, we did a huge of that, working with our Black Employee Network when it came around Black History Month shoe and all of those things from that perspective. So critical. I think there are a lot of other under-indexed functions overall. I think one part is I'm looking forward to being able to work with Becky, the CHRO at SurveyMonkey, people leader, to be able to drive and embed the work overall in how she sees her talent. So it's an exciting opportunity from that perspective.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the state of diversity, equity, inclusion work in this corporatized context. I think now more than ever, people are skeptical about the actual function of this space. And to be clear, I'm part of those people, Antoine.
Yeah,
right?
I know.
So you think about, and what I mean by that is, there's critiques out there that, diversity, equity, inclusion is about kind of like reaffirming the status quo or mitigating litigious risk or all various and extended ways to say protecting the company rather than really like advocating for true disruption or change or and impact. And I'm curious, as you come into this organization that of course has had leadership, but it hasn't had a chief diversity officer before. What does it look like for you to mitigate some of those frustrations or points of skepticism?
Yeah, I think the biggest piece is that, this work, diversity, everyone has a perspective on what we should do, how we should do it, how we should change, how quickly we should do it, which I think complicates the function and the role automatically, right? So everyone knows, I read an article, I know we should do it this way. So I think that's the complication and overall. The other piece is that I always have a question of what would you want us to do? Meaning in the function. And a lot of times it's like, let's fix that right now. And understanding that not everything, you can't just fix everything right now. There are some things you heard me talk about, quick wins, that you're going to need some time to understand. It's just it's the nature of where we are in this country. I think in order to have sustainable change, people have to change how they view the work, because if the leaders don't see their behavior, they'll change something today and 10 months down the road, a year later, we're back in the same view. And I think that's what we're all thinking about right now. That's why the skepticism comes in. That's why your whack opening around trying to be funny. No, I'm just kidding. But racism is gone, is that we know for a fact that if you just sit back and wait, things will shift back into the order we want to do. And so in order not to have that done, I believe it's how do we all look for not a savior function, but how do we all agitate at all of the fringe areas along with the DEI function to drive change? And that, for me, I think that piece is where sometimes the frustration sits in, because it's like we expected you or that function to do it, and the function needs support.
Yeah.
It needs support from everyone going. And I think that's one of the things I've tried to make sure. Heard me talk about building a team much broader, looking at influencers, because sometimes I may say something and people may be skeptical about it. But if an influencer says something at an employee resource group meeting or at some type of function, it's like, yeah, you're right. And it connects to it in that way. The skepticism is always going to be there. It is. And I think it's important for me and for all CDOs and social impact officers is to keep moving ahead, taking that feedback on, reassessing and say if there was something I could have done differently. But without the skepticism, I don't think we would be successful in these roles at all.
I mean, I appreciate you calling my intro whack. It was supposed to be, first of all. Because look, man, I'm an alchemist like that. But no, so I have reactions. I agree with what you're saying. You're using language that resonates with me.
What makes you skeptical about it? You agree? I mean, but what makes you skeptical about the function and the progress of the function?
I think, to make a long answer less long, I've yet to see an office really do some of the things that you said. Collectively mobilize to create agitation across an enterprise. Like I've yet to see, you think about, and what I'm still really passionate about and continuing like really passionate to learn is like studying civil rights movements, like not even of the 60s, but actually of the 40s.
Yeah.
And thinking about like grassroots movements and how pods of resistance were created for structural change and to like really mobilize people. I've yet to see those types of principles applied in corporate context. I think I've yet to see, again, like just all the words that you use, like I just haven't seen that. What I often see First of all, I don't often see people that look like Antoine Andrews. But on top of that, what I've yet to see are folks who are even using pointed, honest language. I don't see a lot of offices really decentering whiteness and centering those who have been harmed and continue to be harmed. And I've yet to really see like a strategic integration across like delivering value and tying it to dollars, which would ensure that that office stays relevant and has actual institutional power, right? To me, they often seem set up as fixtures. Now, this is not a messy podcast. Like, this is not, I know like in like, New York radio and like New Jersey radio is good for like, they'll give you the smoke. Like, this is not that type of platform. But trust me, Antoine, I do have the smoke in my holster, but I just am professional. So I'm not gonna air it out. But there are people out there who sit in these roles and they're kind of like career pivots, right? They're not necessarily there for the people. And so when I hear, and what I'm excited about, why I'm excited about talking to Xander, talking to Katie, and I'm not gonna name drop everybody else, but I'm talking about talking to you about this work, is because there is something unique about the way that this organization, SurveyMonkey, is tackling it. Right. But that's am I being fair?
There's not a blanket statement you can make that says, that's what the functions are. They're individuals, there's companies, but I do know my peers in many organizations pushing really hard, and have been pushing, I think, water uphill for some time. And if I go back to my point, like the landscape has shifted. And so if we measure everyone through what it was versus where we are now, I think that's a bit unfair. And I agree. I think voices now are going to matter. How do we center those that have been under-resourced, under-indexed, and their voices haven't been centered? How do we change that going forward? That is going to be the charge for every function that has a chief or has a diversity, equity, or social impact in their title, in their function. Is how do we shift the conversation to talk about what can we do to what do we need to do? I'm not sure if you're familiar with Ted Childs, he used to be the chief diversity officer well before chief diversity officers ever existed at IBM. And I remember maybe 3 or 4 years ago, him talking about comparing this work to the auto industries, talking about what are our zeros. He was talking to me, he really said, auto industries talking about zero accidents, zero emissions, all of those things. And in a diversity, inclusion, social impact space, what are going to be our zeros? And right now, I think that's what we're trying to establish. We don't want to minimize bias and the impact of it. We want it to be zero out. We don't want racism to be less. We want it to be gone. And we know that's going to be a path. But if we state it, it gives us an opportunity to kind of move towards that and know what we're going towards. Not an easy task, but it's one that we all have to sign up for in this new landscape, in this new footing that we are sitting in, that you hear in the inauguration speech of the President of the United States talking about racial issues in the 400 years that we've experienced it, really putting a stake in the ground. And that's important. That's important. So I think we're on a new path, we're on a new chart, and I do believe there's still going to be skepticism, but you need skepticism in order to have success.
No, you're 100% right. And to your point about perhaps being a little unfair, you're right. I'm open to the reality that I might be being a little unfair. I'll challenge you back and say, I think light attracts light. So the fact that you have a network of folks that are doing the right thing, that don't surprise me, Antoine, because you come across as a very stand-up dude. So, you're probably not going to attract people who are out here moving raggedy, right? So I'm confident that you could probably point me to some folks out there. And of course, like, look, my commentary isn't for everybody.
Yeah.
But I think that what I've continued to observe, there's some patterns that I'm seeing. And I salute those folks who are doing those right things. And you're right. Look, the landscape has not only changed for what DEI needs to be, but the landscape has changed for executives who have historically underfunded, undersupported, underutilized DEI. Like I think it's often forgotten that those offices are not like beholden to themselves, right? They move as much as typically the CEO or that board or whatever the case allows them to move, right? Like there's only so much they can do, irrespective of what their title says. Formal power, like we've been talking about influencing, formal power and informal influence and power are two separate things, and they're not always one-to-one. Antoine, we recorded this a day after the inauguration. Like you said, it's a great time to be joining organizations. Talk to me a little bit more about why you believe SurveyMonkey is a great place to work, and what you're just most excited about in your first couple weeks joining.
Yeah, I will say this. Looking at the inauguration, to your point, we're a day after, the excitement of seeing, and I'm going to be honest, the centering of Black women, and we know their role Black women had in the election was amazing. But just watching that, it was just unbelievable from Amanda Gorman, and really you talking about dropping the mic. That young sister just
bodied that.
Whew, like 3 times last night, just to hear it and watch, and her tonation, all of those things. Like she's
wow. She's a virtuoso. She knows exactly what she's doing with that thing.
Yeah, I was like, put that over a beat.
As we grieved, we grew.
Yeah,
come on, man.
I think for me, from SurveyMonkey's perspective, it's the ability to have access to information that doesn't just center around corporate America. The surveys that we can create to help organizations better understand their diversity, equity, and inclusion and measure those efforts. Looking at, belonging indexes. So SurveyMonkey, we are positioned very well to not only show up as an organization, but help be a part of the conversation that's much broader and much bigger. One of the things, if I had my camera on, you would see a picture of Muhammad Ali standing over Sonny Liston. And I always say, like, always looking for an organization, a leader to be able to punch above its weight. And I believe SurveyMonkey has the ability to really be able to do that. And so I'm excited about that. Culture-wise, from the board to the senior leaders to everyone I've come in contact with right now, one is the time, they're always on their word. If they got back to you, I'm going to get back to you tomorrow, they do. Committed to wanting to and curious to wanting to know, how do we get better? And authentic. Like, my conversations, each person didn't feel canned. It didn't feel like in a corporate language. We just had conversations, and I'm excited about that. I'm excited about that because having the ability to just be allows you to be successful. We talked about Kobe. I'm a big sports fan, Zach. So I talk about sports. When you can just play and not worried about if the coach is going to take you out, making mistakes, more than likely you're going to be pretty successful because you're just flowing. You're just flowing.
Man, this has been dope. Antoine, man, I appreciate you. Look, you're a friend of this. I hope you know you're a friend of the show. Salute to SurveyMonkey. Xander, we see you. Katie, we see you. SurveyMonkey team, we see y'all. Keep on doing what you're doing. Until next time, we'll catch you soon, man. Thank you. And we're back. Look, I just want to shout out Antoine again. Thank you for being on the show. Shout out to the entire SurveyMonkey team. Shout out to Xander. Shout out to Shauna Hughes. Appreciate y'all. I want to remind everybody that for systems to change, it's going to take a combination of strategic internal efforts and external forces pressing up and creating pressure and accountability for those systems. There's going to need to be some level of coordination for there to be true change. Like, when you think back about last year and all of the Black Lives Matter protests, that's really, frankly, why so much stuff started mobilizing and moving in these corporations. It wouldn't have happened without them. And as much as you might like to think those things are separate and distinct, they're not. And the role of a diversity, equity, inclusion office or a diversity, equity, inclusion professional is going to be someone who's able to mobilize and galvanize at the grassroots level and connect the dots across various in-person and digital communities, right? So local communities, global communities, global communities. It's going to be important that they're able to think strategically and logistically about how all those things come together to affect change. What I'm excited about is I really truly believe that Antoine gets that and that SurveyMonkey gets that. Now, before I let y'all go, I want to remind y'all that Living Corporate is not just a single podcast. We're an entire network of digital media. We have web shows, we have blogs, we have one-off webinars, we have all types of content. And this is not the Zach Nunn Show, right? So I want to shout out Nubiana Aben, Mike Yates, Tiffany Tate, Tristan Layfield, Aaron DiCaprio, Neil Edwards of the Leadership Range, Shanisha White, Brandon Gordon, Amy C. Waninger. I want to shout out Madison Butler. I want to shout out the team because we're a collective and we're building something that is really meant to live beyond any one of us, certainly live beyond me. And I can't thank you all enough. If you're asking yourself, man, how can I support you? How can I support Living Corporate? Zach, I really love your voice. You sound great. I would say, first of all, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And then I would say the way that you can support Living Corporate, 2 ways. First way is just tell your friend about us. This is a crazy year. White supremacy is going to be the buzzword of the year. So whether you like it or you don't, white supremacy is going to be a word that you hear a lot. If you're having any conversations about current events, social injustice, diversity, equity, inclusion, lived experience, politics, life, that term and those words are going to continue to come up. So it's actually going to be easier than ever to insert Living Corporate into a conversation. Just let people know, hey, you know what? This is a platform where you want to check out Living Corporate. And then take your phone, press share, and just flip this to them. That's one great way. The second way is you can give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. Easy, free, takes you 13, 14 seconds. You want to write us a review? That would be great. Easy love for us, and it really lets people know about the show. Living Corporate, this podcast is our flagship show. And so the more people know about this, it kind of permeates out to all the other things that we got going on. With all that being said, this has been Zach. You've been listening to the Living Corporate Podcast, where we center and amplify the voices of Black and brown folks at work. Take care of yourselves. Peace.
Living Corporate is a podcast by Living Corporate LLC. Our logo was designed by David Dawkins. Our theme music was produced by Ken Brown. Additional music production by Antoine Franklin for Musical Elevation. Post-production is handled by Jeremy Jackson. Got a topic suggestion? Email us at livingcorporatepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us online on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and living-corporate.com. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned.